Early August 1944, south of Caen, northwestern France. After D-Day, it took Allied troops a month to capture the French city of Caen, despite their initial estimate of a few days. By the 7th of August, the Germans had counterattacked south of Caen and Mortain, but had been repulsed by American troops under General Patton. To exploit the weakened enemy situation, the Allied High Command devised a plan to encircle both the German 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army in an attempt to capture over 100,000 German troops. While the Allied troops prepared to move out from Caen towards Falaise, the dejected Germans moved back towards Argentan in the east, away from Patton's forces at Mortain. On August the 9th, with French and American troops advancing north towards Argentan from Le Mans, General Montgomery launched his offensive from Caen, south towards Falaise, with Canadian, Polish and British troops. Near Falaise, a contingent of troops from the German 7th Army wait in prepared positions, protecting a small Wurzburg radar installation. These radar units were used to direct German fighter aircraft toward attacking Allied bombers. Advancing along the bocage, the hedgerow bordered roads in northwestern France, the Allied convoy finally make contact with the German forces and the battle begins. Not only did the German troops have to contend with the Allied ground forces, but also near continual airstrikes from American and British aircraft. Throughout the two-week confrontation in the Falaise area, the Luftwaffe was relatively absent, and so the Allies enjoyed almost total air superiority. On the 13th of August alone, the American 19th Tactical Air Command destroyed or damaged over 1,000 vehicles, 45 tanks and 12 locomotives. Throughout the fighting in France after D-Day, French resistant fighters would often assist the Allied troops whenever and wherever they could. Being prepared for the Allies gives the Germans an advantage despite the air attacks. And as they counterattack with ground troops and armour, the Allied troops are forced to withdraw. Unfortunately, even while France was being liberated by the Allies, many French resistance fighters were still being captured by the Germans. Irrespective of their minor setbacks and capture, many of the resistance fighters continued to show a strong passion for their fight for liberty. While the German Panther tank advances in support of the ground troops, the German soldiers also attack the Allied vehicles, in this case with a Panzerschreck, the German equivalent of the bazooka anti-tank weapon used by the Allies. As the German advance continues, the Allied artillery, having been brought up from the rear, finally roars into action. Despite the weight of opposition facing the Germans at Falaise, they were still able to cause serious damage to the Allies. On the 20th of August, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps counterattacked a Polish armoured division in the east. The Polish troops were almost overrun until they were reinforced by a Canadian division, and once again the Germans were repulsed. The Germans also have their own heavy weapons in the form of a 6-barreled Nebelwerfer. The Nebelwerfer was referred to as the main mini by Allied troops during the war, on account of the sound made by the rocket projectiles. While the weapon was not highly accurate, it could fire all 6 barrels in less than 6 seconds, laying down a significant amount of firepower in a short period of time. With so many German troops packed into a relatively small area, all trying to pull back to the east, traffic jams were inevitable. The Typhoons and Spitfires took advantage of the situation by destroying the lead vehicles in a column, and then strafing the rest with rockets and cannon fire. Weight of aircraft attacks, artillery barrage and ground troops finally forces the Germans to begin a withdrawal. During the confusion and haste of the retreat, it was not uncommon for some troops to be left behind. Sensing that the Germans are on the back foot once more, the Allied troops advance again and press home their advantage. finally, some close-in action, and hand-to-hand fighting sees the German resolve fail and the Allies emerge victorious. By the 21st of August, Canadian troops from the north had met with US troops from the south, and the remaining Germans in the Falaise area were forced to concede defeat and surrender. This closing of the Falaise Gap and the encirclement of the German armies was the last episode of the Normandy campaign, which had started 8 weeks earlier on D-Day. Fortunately at Classic Fighters, once the battle is over, both Allies and Germans can stand side by side in friendship and can solemnly remember the sacrifices made in France by their forebears.
All day, Allied heavy bombers have been operating in support of the ground troops. They have encountered no fighter opposition. The action so far seems to have been almost too easy. But the reputation of the German armies is still considerable, and there is no disposition to discount their power to hit back. And there is no official admission that our bridgehead is free from concentrated artillery fire. But the general impression is that we are now in a position to start pouring the material ashore, the tanks and the self-propelled artillery. Eyewitness accounts indicate that all movement has ceased in the area of the attack. The roads and rails carry no traffic. That means that the bombers can now start working further inland. Here is a report from Charles Collingwood, Columbia's correspondent with the Navy, who was with a tank landing craft. He says the first craft onto the beaches were the little LCVPs. They came in doggedly, looking very small and gallant with their heads up. Offshore, several miles, loomed the silhouettes of the big ships. Between them and the beaches milled an assemblage of landing craft of all kinds, forming up, waiting to go in. A few thousand yards offshore, 2 patrol boats stood, a mile or so apart. They marked the starting line. They were just out of range of effective machine gun fire. On those boats, each wave of landing craft dressed like a unit of foot soldiers, and were then dispatched to the beach. More and more men reached the beach. At one end of the beachhead, a little knot of German prisoners began to form. Back among the big ships, the admiral decided he could now send in his bigger landing vessels, send them into the shore. The LCIs and the LSTs sidled to the starting line and then headed for the beach. An LCI is 155 feet long and carries more than 200 soldiers. When she hits the shore, a ramp is let down from each side and the soldiers pour out onto the beach. An LST is bigger still. She's a great floating garage. When she reaches shore, her mouth opens and trucks and vehicles of every description roll out of her and are lifted by davits from her hold. When these ships go in, the landing is well underway, and their cargoes quickly build up the power of the assault.